Welcome to Truth Behind History, where we uncover the hidden forces that shape civilizations. Today, we're diving into one of the most important yet often overlooked moments in economic history, the creation and collapse of the Bretton Woods System. Now, I know economic history doesn't sound like the most thrilling topic, but trust me, this one is packed with global power struggles, financial crises, and a bold attempt to create order out of economic chaos. To understand why the world needed a new economic system after World War II, we first need to look at the economic wreckage left behind. World War II wasn't just a political and humanitarian catastrophe, it was an economic disaster. Entire nations were in ruins, cities were bombed into oblivion, industries were gutted, and governments drowning in massive debt. This left the world at a crossroads. Countries could either rebuild the global economy from scratch or risk plunging into another crisis like the Great Depression of the 1930s. And trust me, no one wanted a repeat of that mess. Uncontrolled inflation, currency collapses, and mass unemployment. It was a global financial nightmare. So in 1944, as the war was winding down, world leaders knew they had to act fast. Enter the Bretton Woods Conference, a gathering of 44 allied nations determined to create a new, more stable financial system. And this wasn't just a routine meeting, it was a once-in-a-generation moment, an attempt to rebuild the entire global economy in a way that would prevent future financial disasters. In 1944, as World War II was coming to an end, 44 allied nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a financial system that would prevent future economic disasters. The world had already endured the Great Depression and the chaos of war, so stability was the top priority. Two key figures dominated the negotiations: John Maynard Keynes from Britain and Harry Dexter White from the United States. Keynes had an ambitious idea: a new global currency that would be independent of any one nation. But the U.S., in which was emerging as the world's dominant economic power, had a different plan. White pushed for a system where the U.S. dollar would become the backbone of global trade, and with America holding most of the world's gold reserves, his vision won out. The result? A new global financial order where currencies were pegged to the U.S. dollar, and the dollar itself was backed by gold. This system was designed to keep exchange rates stable and encourage international trade. But that wasn't all. The conference also created two powerful institutions: the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, to prevent financial crises, and the World Bank to help rebuild economies and fund development projects. At the time, this seemed like the perfect solution: a world where currencies were stable, economies could rebuild, and global trade could flourish. But as we'll see, even the most well-planned systems have their breaking points. With the Bretton Woods system in place, two powerful institutions were created to keep the global economy stable: the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. While they're often mentioned together, they were designed for different purposes. The IMF was all about monetary stability. Its job was to help countries avoid financial crises by providing emergency loans and ensuring that exchange rates stayed under control. If a country's currency started to lose value too quickly, or if they were struggling to pay their international debts, the IMF would step in to stabilize things. The World Bank, on the other hand, was focused on development. After World War II, many nations needed to rebuild their infrastructure and kickstart their economies. The World Bank provided long-term loans to help fund projects like roads, bridges, and energy grids. Over time, its mission expanded to supporting economic growth in developing countries, helping them modernize and reduce poverty. At first, these institutions seemed like a strong safety net for the global economy. The IMF would prevent financial disasters, and the World Bank would help countries grow. But the entire system relied on one key factor: the strength of the U.S. dollar. And that's where things started to get complicated. At the core of the Bretton Woods system was a simple but powerful idea: stability through the U.S. dollar. Under this system, the U.S. dollar was directly tied to gold, set at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. In turn, other countries pegged their currencies to the U.S. dollar, meaning the dollar effectively became the world's reserve currency. This gave the U.S. an enormous advantage. Since other nations needed dollars for international trade, the United States could print money without immediate consequences. Meanwhile, countries around the world benefited from a stable, predictable exchange rate, making trade and investment easier. But while this system fueled post-war economic growth, it also made the U.S. economy the center of global finance. Other nations had little choice but to trust that the U.S. would manage its money responsibly. If anything went wrong with the dollar, the entire system could start to unravel. And that's exactly what happened. Over time, cracks began to form, and by the late 1960s, the system was on the verge of collapse. By the 1960s, the cracks in the Bretton Woods system were becoming impossible to ignore. The biggest issue? The strain on U.S. gold reserves. Under this system, every U.S. dollar was supposed to be backed by gold. But as the U.S. printed more money to finance things like the Vietnam War and social programs, the amount of dollars in circulation far outpaced the gold reserves. Other countries started to lose confidence, fearing that the U.S. wouldn't actually be able to convert all those dollars back into gold. Then came the breaking point, the Nixon shock of 1971. President Richard Nixon made a dramatic announcement. The U.S. would no longer exchange dollars for gold. This effectively ended the Bretton Woods system overnight. The world was now moving into uncharted territory. Currencies would no longer be fixed to gold, but instead float freely in the market. With this shift, global finance changed forever. Exchange rates became volatile, central banks had to adjust their policies, and the U.S. dollar remained dominant, but without the gold standard to back it up. This was the birth of the modern forex market, where currencies rise and fall based on supply, demand, and government policies. Bretton Woods was officially dead, but its influence far from over. Even though the Bretton Woods system collapsed, the institutions it created and the influence of the U.S. dollar did not disappear. In fact, many of its effects still shape the global economy today. First, the IMF and World Bank remain central players in global finance. While their original roles shifted, they continue to stabilize economies, support struggling nations, and finance development projects. Many countries still rely on IMF loans during financial crises, and the World Bank continues funding major infrastructure projects worldwide. Second, the shift to floating exchange rates fundamentally changed how currencies work. Instead of governments setting fixed values, exchange rates are now determined by market forces, supply and demand, investor confidence, and central bank policies. This has led to greater flexibility, but also more volatility in currency markets. And finally, despite the collapse of Bretton Woods, the U.S. dollar remains the world's dominant reserve currency. Most international trade is still conducted in dollars, and central banks around the world hold large reserves of U.S. currency. Even without the gold backing, the dollar's power continues, largely because of America's economic and military influence. The world moved on from Bretton Woods, but its fingerprints are still all over modern finance. The Bretton Woods system may have ended, but its impact on global finance is still felt today. It was a bold attempt to create economic stability in a chaotic world, and while it ultimately collapsed, it shaped modern financial institutions, trade, and currency markets in ways that still matter. One of its biggest lessons? Economic cooperation is possible, but difficult to maintain. The system provided stability for decades, proving that nations could work together to create a structured financial order. But it also showed the limits of fixed exchange rates, as economies are constantly evolving and responding to global events. It also reinforced the dominance of the U.S. dollar, which, even without gold backing, remains the world's primary reserve currency. Bretton Woods may be gone, but the dollar's influence didn't just survive, it grew. So what does this all mean for today's world? Well, we now live in a system where currencies float, markets dictate exchange rates, and institutions like the IMF and World Bank still play major roles in shaping economies. But just like in 1944, the world continues to struggle with questions of stability, inflation, debt, and economic power. If you enjoyed this breakdown of how global finance was shaped by history, make sure to like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. And if you love history, check out my other videos. I've got plenty more where this came from. Thanks for watching Truth Behind History. I'll see you in the next one.